So I'm very excited about this next session because it features the one and only Glenn Mercer, who I and most people consider the preeminent researcher in retail automotive. Glenn has over 35 years of experience within retail automotive, and he has an extraordinarily interesting, to say the least, background that includes time with CIA, also with McKinsey, and also a bit of time with Big Oil. But I don't want to be a spoiler here because I want you to learn more about Glenn from Glenn himself, and more importantly, I know that you're going to tremendously enjoy the information that Glenn's about to share with you with respect to the EV industry and where we're going within EVs. So with that, Glenn Mercer, thank you for taking the time to join us today, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. Take it away.
Thank you for the kind words. Your check is in the mail. And yes, to the viewers, I have worked for all three members of the Axis of Evil, the Central Intelligence Agency, Big Oil in the form of British Petroleum, and Evil Consulting in the form of McKinsey, but I am not currently incarcerated or under house arrest. Okay.
Yet.
I'm going to do the, yes. If you hear sirens during this presentation, you'll know they're on to me. Okay, here's the hardest part of the presentation is making sure I share the screen correctly. And bingo, and oops, there we go. So just one confirmation from you, Mr. DS, and that is you can see my title page, right?
Not yet. Go ahead and share the screen.
I am sharing. It is. I am sharing.
There you go. 10 ways of looking at EVs. I'm captivated already.
Well, when I looked at the people you have lined up for this event, I realized there was no way I could add more information or wisdom to sort of the classic discussion about the EV transition, like where are inventory levels now, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll see I've taken an entirely different tack, and we'll see how it works. 10 ways of looking at EVs, with apologies to the great woodblock print artist Hiroshige and his 1830 series, 36 views of Mount Fuji. This will become clear in a little bit, I hope. And you can see my contact information below, and I have a Substack. If you have trouble sleeping at night, you can read my comment there. And hey, when you're finished staring at the mountain, I want to talk about getting a lucid. So on we are going to EVs. What has Mount Fuji got to do with electric vehicles? Well, as I mentioned, this artist made a series of famous woodblock prints. The most famous one of his prints is the Great Wave, which everyone's seen. But this depicts Mount Fuji from various angles, various seasons, various activities in the foreground. The point was to show that even though it's just one mountain, depending on one's perspective, it looks very different. So with apologies to him, I'm sure he's spinning in whatever afterlife he's in right now. I think this is the situation with electric vehicles in the United States. To a coal-rolling Texas pickup driver, EVs are evil incarnate, foisted on the populace by the deep state. To our Marin County yoga instructor, EVs might be a gift from God sent by her to save a sizzling planet. A Paris Island drill sergeant might think this is a way to avoid dependence on foreign oil, but his colleague might say, these are China cars, they'll make us dependent on Chinese batteries. Many different takes, many different views on what EVs are. So what follows here is 10 more views of EVs. I'll try to show you some new things. I really tried to avoid repeating a lot of the stuff, which you may see from other smarter people during this event on the trajectories and market shares and things like that, and try to come at it from a slightly different angle. The point is partly to inform and maybe crack a few jokes, but also partly to show that holding just one view of EVs is naive at best. This is not an all or nothing discussion, is my view. My background, which I won't read through, but I was, as I mentioned, I was at McKinsey for about 2 decades, which is sort of 100 years in dog years, and then have been a sole practitioner since doing research, not consulting. And you can see I've done stuff for various entities and have been on various boards, et cetera, and have been a director of the International Motor Vehicle Program, which benchmarks car factories around the world, and was very honored to be president of the Society of Automotive Analysts, because that office was held for quite a while by the late lamented godmother of every automotive analyst, Marianne Keller. This is my acknowledgement here. I want to thank all the analysts and observers I've learned from. I don't do primary research. I don't go out and interview people on the street or, count cars at the intersection. I mooch work from other people. I depend on their good work and their goodwill in letting me share their work. I always cite it and give it credit. To the extent you like the chart, the credit is due to them. To the extent that I misrepresent their conclusions, that's my fault. And please turn to them to employ the services when you can, as they earn their living doing this. Okay, so 10 views of electric vehicles in America. I will not present in Japanese in case you were worried. First, just to set the stage, this transition has been going on for a very, very long time. And you can go back in history and find any number of quotes on this, but I thought this is a charming one. This is Rolls and Royce. In 1900, 6 years before Rolls and Royce founded the company that bears their names, he wrote, "Electrical vehicles are perfectly noiseless and clean. There is no smell or vibration. They should become very useful for town use when fixed charging stations can be arranged." How naive or optimistic he was. We're a century and a quarter later, and we're still trying to get our fixed charging stations, quote unquote, arranged. So just to give some sort of perspective here about how fast or how slowly things change in the automotive world. The question is now, is today different, or are we doomed to another 100 years of delay? And I think the answer is yes, of course, it's different this time. The question is, how different is it? I don't think anyone at this conference thinks that EV's market share in the United States will go down. There's great dissension as to how fast it will go up, but they're here. And the question of dealers and other players in the industry learning to live with them and make a living from them. So, first view, what everybody wants to know is, what is the trajectory, as just mentioned, in market share in the United States. This may be unpopular, but I think in the long term, which I've conveniently not defined, maybe 2030, maybe beyond that, I can't see how the USA won't follow the other big markets. The tables really have turned. In the United States, for so many years, car companies designed for the American market, or they threw in the towel, and we saw many sort of odd French cars come to America and be driven back. And it was the Japanese who first said, we've got to figure out what they really want and build that for them, and we'll do well, and the Koreans later, et cetera. But the tables have turned. Europe and China combined are much larger than the American market now. And so to the extent that they're going in this direction towards EVs, we're probably going to have to follow, maybe not in pickup trucks, maybe not in Wyoming, but it's hard to see how a global car company could afford to keep maintaining separate product lines in the United States. That's just my view. By the way, a footnote on all the data I show here, everybody measures EVs differently, monthly versus quarterly, registrations versus sales versus production, counting PHEVs or not. Other people say just BEV only. Then there's the confusing PEV, which is BEV plus PHEV, et cetera. So all these numbers are squishy, but the trend is pretty clear. China is rocketing ahead. Europe is moving ahead. The United States is sort of trudging along reluctantly. And I'm going to use now a very odd data source. I'm going to quote an otherwise anonymous Seeking Alpha commentator who has the unfortunate handle of Doggy Dog World, as in dog eat dog world, but who has had brilliant insights on this market for a long, long time. So here we go. He digests it all into one paragraph. I will read the whole thing because this really sums it up in my view. The world's biggest vehicle market is about to cross 40% EV, up from 30% a year ago. EVs won't gain 10% share every year in China, but Xi wants to end oil imports, so further growth is guaranteed unless you want to bet against Chairman Xi. Well, they'll pass 60% by 2026 and probably be 80% by 2030. Europe will be 30% in 2025 by law unless they change it. Will they mandate 60% by 2030? Bet on it, especially after Putin taught them the folly of depending on foreign hydrocarbons. USA is way behind, of course, but Trend City, California is 25% EV and growing. Lefty states, his phrase, not mine, are passing bans. So by 40% by 2030 is a relative walk in the park. I don't agree with all his numbers, but I think he's summed it up in one capsule of where the EV market is going globally and America being dragged along behind. In the short term, of course, though, we do have a slowdown. Technically not actually a slowdown in EV sales, but a slowdown in the rate of EV sales growth. So we're still continuing to sell more and more EVs in the United States, but you can see in this calculation, again, another different calculation, this one from Wells Fargo, using Ward's data, actually a decline in market share of EVs as the overall market outpaced the EV sales in December of last year. This is, again, just BEV. It's much higher if you throw in PHEV. So I think from our view, this is one of the problems Americans have, is we see everything through an American lens. But no, it's not just us. And I just want to flag that here in that, let's take a look at Germany. The bars here are percentage rate of growth month by month. And you can see on the right-hand side, Mr. Schmidt has put the scale up here, is Germany was leaping ahead in EV registrations, April, May, June, look at that, August kind of thing, and has fallen way back, September, October, November, due to an expiration of subsidies. Notice the bars are all still positive. We're still growing. It's just a pullback in the rate of growth. For those of you that world of, familiar with the world of calculus, the rate of growth is slow, but have not slowed growth so far that it's flattened out. So it isn't just us. And Germany is, of course, reckoning with the balance of an economy that is so dependent on big ICE OEMs and a political scene that is very green. And how do they balance them out? We've seen that play out in the United States as well. So my second view is this is actually not only an American phenomenon. Europe is also wrestling with some of these issues as well, and even to some extent China. Next view, one thing that comes up over and over again, and you've got you've got a lot of experts on this in this event, but is, Japan is behind. Toyota is about to vaporize those idiots on the small island nation. Don't they know that BEVs are the end all and be all? But the Japanese have always taken an incremental approach to go from ICE to hybrid like Prius, to plug-in hybrid like a Prius Prime, to a BEV, and then maybe fuel cells. Press reports excoriate the Japanese, especially Toyota, for lagging the rest of the developed world. But from the perspective of the Japanese, this is flawed. Toyota has said it would prefer the results be regulated, lower emissions, not the means to achieving those results. Thus, current new car average fuel economy in Japan is 55 miles per gallon, which is astonishing, thanks to widespread hybridization and, of course, the K cars, which are limited to 660 cc and don't pollute much at all. So the current Japanese sales makeup, and I don't know if that's known well here in the United States, is only 3% BEV, 1/3, say, of where we are, but 46% hybrid and PHEV. This is a hybridized nation, and with regular ICE, 51%. So the Japanese are taking a different path. They thought they would just evolve their way to BEVs, but the rest of the world is a little more ideologically driven. We've decided ICE bad, EV good, and no room for transition. However, the performance of Japan has been pretty darn good. This is carbon dioxide emissions overall per capita around the world. You can see China's coming up because it burns a lot of coal and it's a growing economy. The United States is coming down, and you know why it's coming down. Right there, just around the time of the Great Recession, the fracking boom took off, and we did a wholesale swap of coal out and natural gas in. And that has really driven our emissions down. But you can see Japan has performed very, very well across decades of growth in holding their numbers down. This is not all just transportation emissions, but they've got a point, that maybe in terms of total emissions, having half your cars be ultra low emissions is better than having 8% of your car is be zero emissions. And I want to beat on this drum a little bit more with my third view, and that's plug-in hybrids. America, I think, is ruled by the sports metaphor. That's all we live for in America, which means somebody wins, somebody else must lose. We don't like ties. We don't like trade-offs. And we don't like PHEVs. We are either for, rolling coal in that diesel truck or for a Tesla Model 3. And we don't like, our regulators don't like plug-in hybrids because they're neither fish nor fowl. But boy, are they a great way to transition to a BEV world because they're like training wheels. You can drive a PHEV in electric mode. Once you get comfortable with electric mode, you can say, I didn't really need to drive 400 miles every day. Maybe I can go to a 200-mile range EV, etc. And in China, which we look to as the leader in BEVs, PHEV share, which is this light green, is actually growing faster than EVs are growing in China. It's never going to be dominant, according to this Bernstein forecast, and according to the Chinese government itself, but they play a really valuable role, especially in rural areas and suburban areas. Again, in the United States, we've decided, no, it's one or the other, and we reject the middle ground. Full disclosure, I own both a BEV and a plug-in hybrid, the car of the year, Toyota Prius Prime. Next, and this is where I've stolen shamelessly from J.D. Power, specifically Tyson Dominy. I think our problem in the United States is not necessarily that EVs are too expensive. They are, but it's more a matter of product. Remembering, of course, that with EV, the product is a combination of vehicle plus charging network. But leaving that aside for a minute, as J.D. Power has pointed out, Tesla cut its blended average transaction price by over $25,000 between fall of 2022 and fall of 2023 and gained only 1 point of market share. This is incredible if you think about it. Can you name any brand that could cut price by $25,000 and not have market share rocket upward? J.D. Power has shown in its estimates, sorry for the Greek letter, but that's the price elasticity of demand, that EVs are running about 0.6 to 1.2, where the regular gasoline cars are 1.6 to 3, meaning with an ICE car, if I cut price by 10%, I expect demand to go up by 15 or 30%. EVs, a 10% price cut, maybe get me less than a 10% boost in sales, which doesn't pencil out in terms of profitability. My conclusion from this is that EVs are fundamentally less attractive to customers than ICE vehicles. I don't mean EVs. So you can cut price, but it may be at some point you'll sell more, but not much more. It's the wrong product. It's like telling a vegetarian, I've cut the price of the Big Mac. It really doesn't matter how much you cut the price. I don't want your burger. And the problem here, as Tyson has pointed out, and I totally agree with, is the first EV in mass market in the United States was the Nissan Leaf. It was small, it was cheap, at its short range, it did not sell. Then who showed up with very expensive, long range, fast EVs, made a fortune, maybe the largest fortune in the history of the world. And every OEM has since followed, loading more and more product into the premium segment. The premium segment is now overstuffed and clogged, as it were. And until we get our Model T moment, which is something that's truly like a $25,000 fairly long range EV, the market may not unclog for some time. Or maybe imagine a BEV RAV4, what that would go for. We haven't had our Model T moment yet. And unfortunately, the Model T in EVs does exist. It's a BYD or Zeekr, and it's in China, and it can come here, but that runs into politics, which we'll come back to. And of course, you've got a China expert talking on this session as well, and he can tell you more about it. But our Henry Ford actually lives in China at this point in time, which adds a nasty political twist. Not only are we having trouble figuring out prices and products, but we have a problem in development cycles. This is a great chart from Bernstein and Alliance Bernstein based on the Korean data service SNE, showing average market share versus model age in months for EVs. It just tapers off. An EV that launches with about a 0.5 percentage point market share, 5 years later is at one fifth that. These models age very rapidly, which makes sense because the new model keeps coming out. The new model has a better battery, has more range, has more screens, et cetera, et cetera. And so customers keep waiting to buy because they know the next model is going to be a radical improvement, which means we churn models quickly. And so instead of the classic launch the Camry, let it run for 4 or 5 years and then renew it, it's launch the Camry BEV, run for 2 years, and then we've got to launch it again, which makes things extremely expensive. And crucially, so that's a different twist from EVs on just how expensive it is to compete here. It isn't just a matter of the batteries cost a lot and it's hard to sell them, but we have to renew faster than we ever wanted to, which is painful and expensive. And crucially, the nature of EV design also shifts the basis of competition. Mm-hmm. To the extent that EVs succeed in the world so far, other than our local boys in California, it's really China leading the way, of course. And to the extent that new EVs are Chinese, the Chinese rules of competition will tend to permeate the world. And the Chinese compete hard, fast, and quote unquote irrationally. It's an eye test chart here, but I'm going to highlight a few things on it. The idea being that the Chinese have taken to heart that an EV is different in terms of architecture, physically and software-wise, and they're just going to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. So not only are we having to deal with a new powertrain, a new power supply, a new supply chain, and a new superpower in the industry, but a superpower doesn't play by the usual rules. Note, first of all, these are models launched in about 1 week at the end of December last year. Who launches models between Christmas and New Year's? The Chinese do. And look at this. This is a Neo ET9 with a 900 volt architecture, which means, just to make sure I say this correctly, that it should be able to add 150 miles in about 5 minutes. So while we're trying to figure out how to, just get EVgo to work, these things are out there. Notice the Ito M9, 10 screens. Okay, I think we've reached peak screens. The point here is that just throw them in the car. One is up on the headliner, so you can look up there and see if people buy it or not. If it doesn't work, scrap it and move on. The Zeekr 007, the 007, this I would say is our Model T. This is a 400-mile range EV for $30,000 in China. Enough said. Then look at this, the Xiaomi, I probably mispronounced it, SU7, with the lowest recorded coefficient of drag of any vehicle I think sold on the road today, maybe ignoring a Koenigsegg or something. And then this one is great. I don't know why the X9 has a refrigerator on board, but put it in and see if the public will buy it. So the nature of competition is shifting as well. It isn't just enough to have an EV, but what kind of EV do you have? Next, this one takes a little discussion. The notion that EVs would be built to order, not Bachman-Turner overdrive, is now dispelled. There was a thought a few years ago when Tesla was really leading the charge, and no pun intended, and still is, that EV customers in America would be somehow different. They would go online, they would type in what they wanted, they would be told to wait 7 months and they would appear and all would be well. But crucially, we've seen as the market has developed and matured, once we've gone past the tech bros who already had 3 cars in their driveway, could wait for the newest toy from Fremont, that even Tesla has seen the whole build-to-order mirage evaporate. In fact, Tesla was never truly built-to-order. They were built to batch. They could get away with this because they have so few options in the car, wheels, interior color, that's about it. So they could, anything you ordered, they were likely going to build anyway. But you can see now that the order backlog at Tesla has plummeted to the point where now they're building kind of an inventory just like everybody else, no longer supply limited in the United States, which is quite a change of pace. It looks like EV customers maybe are similar to mass market ICE customers. Next, with an eye towards the clock, moving along, we all know that EVs are political. Isn't it great that everything in America can become political? I just wish we could politicize everything. Probably we'll split Burger King versus McDonald's according to parties. It's very tedious, but here is a very recent study from just last fall. And I'm going to read this one a little bit because it's pretty well written and you can pull it off offline. Many new technologies start off as niche products, appealing to a small subset of households, but it's been 14 years since Leaf came out, 16 years since the Tesla Roadster, now 100 different EV models for sale in the United States. One might have thought that by now, EVs would just be sort of in the landscape, like there's a minivan, there's an SUV, etc. But the authors have found a strong and enduring correlation between political ideology and U.S. EV adoption. About half of all EVs in America are sold to the 10% most Democratic voting counties. And despite dramatic growth in the overall size of the market, the correlation is higher now than it was in 2012. That is, EV buyers are more Democratic than they were. We do not find evidence that the U.S. EV market is broadening across the political spectrum. So the party battle lines have been drawn, and you can see the chart on the right-hand side, Democratic vote share by county, on the lower axis, vertical axis, EV share. It's a pretty good match. And this means, of course, that a lot of what I'm talking about today and other people are talking about today may be overturned entirely depending on how the election goes in November of this year. For those who are interested, the paper actually lists the most and least Democrat EVs just for fun. The most Democratic EVs are the Volkswagen ID4, Tesla, et cetera, et cetera. The least Democratic, oddly enough, there's a lot of Republicans buying Lucids and Rivians. I would not have guessed that, but there you go. Next is one argument, just, a random argument that comes up a lot is, well, the grid's dirty. So when we plug in the EV, even if the EV doesn't emit, the grid is emitting, and so EVs are dirty. This one's kind of gone away. The dirt in EVs now comes literally from the dirt, digging up cobalt and stuff, as one person told me, which was, wish I could remember their name because it's a great saying. Say we swapped drilling for digging. Instead of drilling for oil, we now dig up lithium. And that's very dirty. But in terms of the actual mix of the power grid in the United States, while we're all arguing about renewables left and right, is the big change. You can see it again. You can see that drop. We showed it before in emissions. But here it is, right between 2005 and 2010. The fracking revolution took off. Natural gas soared. Coal has plummeted. We don't really have a dirty grid anymore. So that argument is a little moot. Lots of arguments against EVs, but this one, I think, has been kind of put to bed. Okay, almost at the end. 10th view about Fuji. This is a brilliant study done by a firm I've never heard of before called Cultura, where they just went around and looked at cars and their consumption of gasoline. So on the right-hand side, you can see that the deciles of consumption of gasoline. This is in California, but it seems to work out across the country as well. Basically, there are people in rural areas that are really putting on the miles. And on the left-hand side, you can see who these so-called super users are, the top 10%. Who drive 30,000 miles per year on average. The average EV goes less than 10,000 miles a year. They use over 1,000 gallons of gasoline a year, and they're generating 1/3 of all our light vehicle emissions. Lower household income than EV buyers. So what this means is, it just sort of, I throw up my hands here, nothing you can do about it, but it means even if we converted 90% of all the cars in America to EV, we'd only be reducing emissions by about 2/3, because these people can't afford and need to cover so much ground that with current EV offerings, they really cannot convert. So an interesting sort of twist of the knife. That being said, if we'd have some sort of, solid state super battery, you get 600 miles and a charge, this will change. Currently, I think it's important to note that just swapping out 90% of all the vehicles in America won't really move the needle as much as we may hope. Okay, so that's about it for me. I'm down about zero. I'm going to throw in one bonus chart while we're talking about emissions. I hope some of these charts have been thought starters for different ways to think about EVs, pro and con. The last one is, while we're still in emissions, is bonus chart. Time to go after lawnmowers. It's probably seriously better for the environment for you to drive your car than mow your lawn. you may want to talk to your spouse about this and next time he or she is asking you to mow the lawn. But gasoline-powered mowers, trimmers, leaf blowers, etc., emit as much greenhouse gas as 6 million cars, as much NOx, nitrous oxides, as 30 million cars. And believe it or not, they're kind of tied with the car fleet for particulate matter emissions. So bonus chart here, but if you really wanted, since all we do is talk about greenhouse gas, we've kind of lost sight of pollution. Remember good old pollution and smog? And as California and others now are going after these very high emitters, lots of particulate matter emission, not to mention noise pollution as well. So maybe the next EV transition will be in lawn care. Okay, I ran over by a couple of minutes, so I'll stop and end with one last view about Fuji. I'll stop sharing, and I don't know if we want to do any questions at this time.
Glenn, that was absolutely spectacular, incredibly interesting. And what I enjoyed most about it, and I suspect a lot of people will say this, is really the incredible level of just, I guess, variety or views, which you put it very well, the 10 views, 10 different perspectives, because it just validates the fact that this is not a black and white situation. Your bonus slide put the icing on that cake, right? And we might as well talk about electric cows too, since we all know that the beef industry is a significant contributor to pollution, as is fast fashion, I believe, the last time I read those statistics. So we have a lot more electrification that we need in clothing and cattle. But with that being said, a couple of things that come to mind. Number one, the likelihood in your mind that our traditional OEMs are going to be able to keep pace in any way, shape, form with both the variety of features and benefits and performance that you showed in that slide with the Chinese manufacturers, and maybe more importantly, price. Because, when BYD comes to the United States, which we know they're going to use a dealer network and not a direct consumer model, which, depending on which side you are, it's either brilliant or evil. But they are going to use a dealership franchise model, and they are going to come to the United States with probably, most likely, lower cost EVs. You had a slide on there specifically that said it's not just price alone. And so could you speak to that? What do you think, number one, is the likelihood that traditional OEMs are going to be able to pivot towards the lower price? And two, will it matter?
Right. Okay. So let me take that compound question apart a little bit. First of all, I think for any Chinese manufacturer operating in the United States, direct or via dealers, whatever, is as much a political question as anything. And my ability to predict politics is absolute less than zero, whether, tariffs are slapped all over them, even if they're, laundered through Mexico or something like that. Going to be as much a political game as anything else. So I just don't know at that level. But I will get to your questions. Then in terms of price, I think what the Chinese will run into a little bit is, if it's just a matter of low price, their greatest competitor is a competitor who remains unnamed in most of our industry discussion. That's the used car. If in normal times a 3-year-old Honda is $20,000, that's a really hard value proposition to beat with a $25,000 EV. So I think, that's one of the reasons why the Chinese didn't show up in 2005, 2007, et cetera, on our shores, because I think they realized just low price was inadequate in itself against this, going to CarMax. Leaving that aside, will the Americans be able to keep up? I think people like to discuss this in sort of general terms, like will they compete or not? Well, let's face it. We take all the major OEMs, and I assume they have 10,000 or 15,000 engineers each. We've got, 250,000 people waking up each day going, how the hell are we going to deal with this? So it's all like they're not focused on it, and it's not like they aren't trying. So I don't. I guess I wouldn't count them out in some sort of blanket statement. What I would do if I were them is I'd be pulling a Geo or Sterling as soon as possible and signing up JVs with Chinese manufacturers and saying, you make the car for us, we'll bring it in underneath our brand, we'll talk to Congress and be allowed to do that. Like Suzuki Geo Metro's not the greatest car ever lived, but we're going to move on from that. But Isuzu, Daihatsu, Ford with Mazda, and leverage it that way, figure out, use the breathing room that would create to then, build up your own skills domestically, which is kind of what they did with, it's a little bit like General Motors with its, again, Suzuki or whatever, before they could get Saturn working. So I think that might be one way to compete. Now, BYD is not going to sign up for that, I don't think. They want to make their own money. But there's plenty of Chinese struggling EVs, OEMs who might be willing to take that. Who did Volvo Polestar sign up with, for example? So, that's one way to bridge the gap.
So two more quick questions before you wrap up.
Okay.
Being that the reality is, forget the geopolitical size, but just factually, that 85% of batteries are being produced out of China, and that they are either controlling or directly involved with approximately 92% of the refining of minerals you need to create a battery. So is it fair to say that when it comes to the price part of the equation and the reality that batteries are the single largest cost within a BEV, that if you're not a Chinese manufacturer, the reality is you don't control pricing. You don't control those costs. And therefore, if you're going to start creating a lower cost option that does not include a joint venture, that's probably going to be a challenge.
Oh, absolutely going to be a challenge. And, what is it, I'm no expert in this area, but, 5 to 8 years to open a mine, processing plants. And, like people say, well, what is it, the Salton Sea in California? It's got plenty of lithium in it. Yeah, opening a lithium mine in California, that's going to fly.
That'll work.
You can't even build, offshore wind, it's absolutely going to be a challenge. I completely agree. Certainly, one thing that rarely enough has aligned both the Trump and Biden administrations is we've got to build more chips. We got to build more battery supply domestically. But it's going to take a long time. And so I agree, it's a huge challenge. But that's why I was suggesting trying to bridge the gap with some kind of JV effort. And I think the Chinese, referring to a country with more than 1 billion people in one phrase, is probably idiotic. But I think the Chinese would probably be supportive of this, because I think the last thing they want is they lay waste to the American industry and we put 75% tariffs on it. We did it with pickup trucks and chippings, but we can do it again.
Yeah, and this is just maybe a little bit of a comment, and then we had to jump to my last question. But, when we see that slide that looks at U.S. at 8%, and during that snapshot, of course, versus Europe, I believe, was 14.9%, and then you had China rocketing up at 30% and beyond. Those are three, we're transitioning from, in another way, not just ICE to BEV, but previously, you built a car and you sent it to markets around the world, and the consumers were basically the same, and the political side did not play into it. The European market is dramatically different from the U.S. market in my eyes, from a political perspective, right? In environmental regulation perspective, data perspective. The Chinese market is more dramatically different, right? When you look at the fact that it's a socialist country, it's government controlled, and so on and so on. The U.S. market, you had that slide that showed, hey, if I'm essentially not a Democrat, if I'm not in a specific geographic area, the likelihood of me flipping to a BEV, whether I'm in a rural market having to drive 300 miles a day or not, is pretty low probability. But I'm going to use that as a lead-in to my last question. In the next approximate 12 months, one of the other slides mentioned that we're going to be at or nearing 100 models. Well, we saw in the last quarter with just a little over 50 models, a relatively significant sagging in the demand, if you could call it that, of BEVs. And my assertion has always been, and let me frame this. Toothpaste is out of the tube. They're here. We must figure out how to leverage them, how to create the best opportunity, the best outcome. I get it. But the reality is, you can't force people in, certain markets outside of Texas, for example. Hey, everybody has to buy cowboy boots. That's all we're going to make at Nike now for California's cowboy boots. It's just not going to work. So at 100 models, we're going to have twice the selection. We already have most BEV models struggling to get to 0.5% or 1%, struggling to get even to relevancy or interest. What happens with these next 50 models? Do you believe by the end of 2024 with this newest onslaught of models that it's going to accelerate demand or accelerate the opposite?
I think I smell a lot of burning rubber in 2024. So will 100 models sell more than 50 models? Yes. Will they sell a lot more? I don't think so. I mean, we do not need one more $65,000 or $49,000 semi-premium EV, which we've seen already. Again, the J.D. Power's insight on Tesla, to knock $25,000 off a car and barely move the sales needle tells you it is a product problem.
My assertion, Glenn, has always been people don't want EVs. They want Teslas, just like people don't want smartphones. They want iPhones. I don't care if you build a flip phone. Nobody's standing in line for your flip phone or your foldable screen, but they will stand in line to buy an iPhone 16 to replace an iPhone 15 that works perfectly well.
Well, as one white-haired guy to another white-haired guy, I should tell you that flip phones are making a comeback on campus. I have a nephew who's got a flip phone, and everyone wants his phone. They can't believe how little it does. They think it's so
all
stupid.
All right. I stand by my assertion.
But no, I agree. We are putting 10 pounds into a 5-pound bag. I think and again, I think I'm stealing language from J.D. Power here. If we would think more in terms of a transition than a replacement, we'd be fine. Just got to move the needle a little this month, do that, get a few more chargers working, change the incentives from chargers to install them, to actually get them to be installed and working, et cetera, et cetera. I think we'll be fine. But this kind of how do we just flip the entire market over at once is not viable. I sort of, in a way, blame Tesla for this, just as a closing comment. And I don't mean that it was deliberate on their part, but Tesla saw that nobody wanted a little urban commuter Leaf. He said, we got to go high versus low. And then they made a mint doing it. And that set the thermostat, as it were. People said, that is how you do it. You go direct to consumer with a fast, expensive, long-range vehicle. We all went that way at the same time, all trying to get that stock price. And now we realize maybe we should have diversified our bets more. I do understand that a Leaf with a 300-mile range is going to be a money loser because the battery is going to cost so much. There's a reason for going up market. But we've all arrived up market, and, there's only room for so many symphony orchestra concerts in town before you got to add some country western. And this is the problem we're into now. We don't have the Model T. The Model T we do have is likely to be Chinese, and that is a political issue.
Yeah. So you had a bonus chart. I'm going to throw in a bonus question, 30-second answer.
Okay. Lightning round.
If all incentives were removed to level the playing field, to make it clearly an apples-to-apples scenario from a product perspective, through a consumer's lens, if there were no incentives, federal incentives, for example, or otherwise, on EVs, would we even be where we are now? And would EVs have a likelihood of increasing percentage of sales or the number of sales the way they do currently?
I think incentives were hugely important early on, and I'm going to say this with a bit of a spin on it, and that is, speaking of California, because early on, that was the only market that mattered, that giving an EV HOV lane privileges, I think really moved the needle, right? If you're in LA or San Francisco and you get to drive in that lane free of charge, it's a big deal. You may recall years ago, people were carjacking, Teslas to pull the bumper off. Priuses to pull the bumper off just to get the HOV sticker. So I think early on, things like that made a big difference. Again, I know I'm flying in the face of economics. An economist would say, well, if the EV costs $7,000 less due to a rebate, you'll sell more of them. Yeah, but I think it kind of depends where you are in the purchase funnel. I don't know if that rebate makes you add the EV to your shopping list. Maybe once it's on your shopping list, it might induce purchase. But if it's the wrong vehicle for you, I don't know. And the incentives, as you know, are so fishy, as in, well, wait till next year and see what your 1040 says. I know they're changing that now, et cetera. But, you got to lease it to get it. The Prius Prime I got $4,500 off. That was only because I leased it, and what if I don't want to, so it gets squishy pretty fast. So I think at this point in time, I don't know if federal incentives are doing much at this point in time.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with OEM incentives, because it's highly likely we will see a lot more of them as we add another 50 models. Glenn, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to create this incredibly compelling deck of information, for sharing your perspectives as always, and for being part of the Disruptive Forces EV event. Look forward to seeing you at hopefully at NADA, and I certainly would encourage people to reach out to Glenn if you want more information, you want to connect. He had his email up there, and also to check out his Substack, because that is some fine reading.
There
Glenn,
you go.
thank you so much.
I'll put some of the charts on there. And last thing I'll say is, there was no point to my presentation other than that. This is to illustrate how complex a problem this is. So people were scratching their heads going, so what was his summary conclusion? I didn't have one other than, this is an incredibly complicated puzzle with a lot of moving parts. That's my final comment.
Well, I think it's a brilliant way to end, because as we start 2024, and the pure reason we're doing this is to help retail dealers out there figure out how to position themselves most effectively to optimize the opportunity while protecting themselves from potential downside exposure to net profit. So thank you for your contribution to that.
Sure. Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks so much. All right. We will be coming up with our next session in just the next 60 seconds. Stay tuned.